Okay. Look at this again. Cable. Okay. Hopefully it sounds okay. Also, the noise gate is working better on the coaxial now. Okay. Let's get started on this. Make sure I'm up to date. Close that down. Fewer things to navigate through. Down. Switch pot down. Down. Oh, okay. So the challenge to having a stream dedicated to viewers is the balance of when do I actually start doing what I'm going to do, right? Okay, so what I'll do on today's stream. You also got to remember there is VODs as well, so that's okay if I could proceed. So what I've done so far is Junica's kindly made a PR to add some more functionality to the application and to move forward with the issues, right? So issue 11, we need a new endpoint to get preferences, and this is the whole we start water, drink water. So far we have a Blazor web app, a Blazor WebAssembly application, and an API running, right? And we start up Chrome, and we have an app running, and we are logged in, right? And we can get preferences, so we can set this target. If you look in the database over here, there are preferences for these users, right? So there are already values. They're not loading. So this is what Junica's PR is meant to address, right? So putting in the endpoint for that, not the UI tie-up. Let's log out, yeah. So accounts, we have John at test.com, test.com, Bob. Nope, test at test.com, Bob. There you go. So obviously we have a few UI bugs, but that's minor in this application. So that's what this PR is meant to resolve, right? So there we go. So we had a bit of a discussion on this, where Junica said, looking further, this issue needs to, we probably should create different service repositories, etc., for preferences. But right now, being that there is only one kind of grouped behavior, consumption repository works, right? He also created another issue. Oh no, I created an issue that you know, the behavior needs to be corrected. So we'll address the UI components in this one, but the server components in this PR, right? because the application is being developed as a API and optional UIs, so that people can contribute their own UIs, can build everything they want to build off the API. The benefit of doing the PR separately is clear. So that's the path we'll go down. So the API component here, this endpoint is needed. We had a discussion looking further into this issue. It looks like this should be different. Yeah, we should have a discussion around patterns, etc. I agree that it doesn't need to be in these pieces, but for right now, pragmatically, right? Yeah, pragmatically, the benefit is we move forward and we can make those decisions later. There's nothing harmful to doing the code in here. It's just not probably the best place to put it, because eventually, we'll have to clean this up and make this better. So let's have a look at this PR. So this is a new endpoint for preferences, right? Preferences get. So right now in the code, we have an endpoint for post to save the preferences. So the pattern here is one of using the verbs. So we're adding a new get endpoint, and in here we're going to try and pull the user ID out, right? And if we do that, then we're going to go and get preferences for this user, and then we're going to return the result of those preferences with the target fluid analysis, right? Okay. And then return this preferences VM. So this is a minor nitpick, right? And it does not affect the behavior of the application. It is one of personal preference, right? And that's obviously going to be the first thing as you are developing an application with other people. One of the first things you're going to come up across is personal differences in how you write code, how you structure code, personal preferences versus, knowledge, right? Just because I do it one way doesn't mean that Junicus is wrong in doing it a different way, right? So it's about balancing those things and coming up with those standards and developing those things, rather than just saying outright, no, that's wrong because I don't believe that's the right way to do it. Hey, Dota. Good morning. How's it going? Okay, no worries. No worries. Yeah, that was quite a fun discussion. Ooh, 1.5 feet of snow. Ouch. You have to clear that in anyway. That's tiring. I cannot imagine doing that more than once in every couple of years. Oh, wow. Yeah. I love snow, but the only time I love snow really is when I don't have to clear it. I can just sit and watch it and just leave it be. That would be my ideal snowstorm. Yep, no worries, Delta. Appreciate the look. Okay, so again, yeah, view models, right? We haven't really done very much already, obviously. There's no pattern in place. If we look at the code so far, there's not really a big pattern. It's very clear, right? When we post, we have the parameters in here. Registration, we post, we have the parameters in here. But I haven't really kind of made any obvious patterns clear. Sometimes that's the best way, right? The best way is to actually write some code and evolve your understanding and see how you feel about things, right? Rather than just saying, oh, we need to do this and this and this and this and this. Start out the gate of just writing code and seeing how some things evolve, and just be willing to change things, right? If you're willing to evolve that code. So I did have a pattern of the request being the request model, and there was this one example where I call it response, right? The reason I call it response and not view model, for my personal thing, is I'm not concerned with the view, right? So I'm kind of just getting rid of that term, because what often happens is you write code and it kind of infers its usage as much as representing what it is. Right. I'll give you an example. If I call this if I return a list of things, if I call the class public class list view results there, right? It's kind of obvious what it's going to be, right? It's going to be a list of values, right? Let's say this has an enumerable of object, right? Or items, right? But here, what I've done is I've actually called it the component I'm going to use it in, right? And I've seen this a lot over the years, where people try and use the thing they're aiming to put it into in the name so that it kind of sits. But that's not what we need, right? We need to be, this is a response to this request, right? Or a response to this action to do something, this request to do something. So view model. View model is a common practice. Sorry, my eyes are dry. View model is a common naming convention. It's not uncommon, that's for certain. I don't have an issue with calling things view models. That's not the problem. The first thing is I don't like abbreviations. My personal preference, I don't like abbreviations, so there's something we can discuss, right? I know that we're just saving typing, right? And we know that it's a view model, right? But if this moves up into here as response, do we need this? Because we don't see this, right? We don't. This isn't. This doesn't travel. This isn't shared, right? It can be specific to this object. If we share this object because we think we might need it somewhere else in the future, then we're kind of doing ourselves a disservice, because then we're trying to tie these two things together and making sure that if one changes, we have to change the other one, right? And that might not be correct. So that's kind of why I've gotten into this pattern of using these inside of here and calling it response, right? Again, it's a minor gripe. I'm not going to stop a PR for that. That can be refactored. So I'm going to add a comment. We haven't really discussed naming conventions yet, but is there any need for containing class? And we can refer to the login service, login endpoint, post. Right. So we have the opportunity to discuss this, and it's okay to start a conversation, right? Let's start a review. Right. So if you start a review, it puts all your comments in pending, and starting a review, if you're going through a big PR, is the most useful way to do this, because what it means is that if you look at a piece of code and your knee-jerk reaction is to add a comment to it, right? So let's say I'm responding, I'm doing that because I'm just being like, oh no, that's wrong, and I go to put a comment in. If I hit single comment, it will add the comment immediately. The creator of the PR will see it. Now let's say I read down a few lines and I realize there's a reason for that existing the way it does. Now my comment has to be addressed, but the original author of the PR has seen the comment, or has been told there is a comment, and maybe reviewed it and been like, oh, this isn't good, right? So starting a review when you're doing, especially, this isn't a particularly big PR, I know what this is going to do, but starting a review is often helpful from the perspective of just giving yourself time to pause and think about why, and you can go back and edit this and remove this again if you feel that that comment is no longer needed because there's a pattern later on or something, right? So that's a good idea, right? On the consumption service, we're going to have a get preferences. We have int, a nullable int here. Again, can this be null? Does this have a default? I think yes, it does, because if we were doing this in part of the story planning, then we would have agreed, okay, well, we need the preferences because we're going to call get preferences regardless, and if it's null, we just default it on the UI. But the absence of preferences is null, right? So we know that there's no preferences because, again, right now this is called preferences, but really what it is fluid ounces, right? So we do have a bit of a disconnect here, right? So, but we only have one field. So again, not really a reason to pull up the PR, but no, again, and Junicus may be doing, I know Junicus is an experienced developer, so Junicus may be doing some of this just for the conversation, or just was kind of like, yeah, I'll do it this way. But it's worth adding the comments to and making sure it's documented. Is this method really about preferences or fluid analysis, right? And again, because we only have one preference, that there's no point in making this create an object or whatever, so it kind of might be serving two purposes, right? And we know that it's going to be refactored, so it doesn't mean you shouldn't stop and think, hey, is this the right thing to do? And again, if this code could live out there for a while, then maybe we don't want to do that, because any code we write is going to set a pattern, right? So if I write this now and allow this totally without comment, then that's the pattern, right? That's the pattern we follow, right? Preferences of fluid analysis. So we had a review comment. Again, is on the interface, and then in here, get preferences, right? We don't have an object, and we don't want to return. So we have a preferences object in the database, right? But we definitely don't want to expose that up the line to the client, right? We're not going to do that, right? So exposing the underlying data model isn't an option, right? We're not going to make this return a preference and then put the database object straight up to the front. That's not the way we're doing it, and that's where view models come in, right? So if we have to modify objects and change the data, then the view model becomes a thing. Right, but for right now, because the way we're doing this, right, we're creating this preferences view model on here, then this is a response. This isn't a view model, right? If we were returning the data from up here, then this might be a view model, right? That's maybe we create a preferences view model and pass that up. And again, because we're so minimal right now, this can be refactored pretty quickly. So there's no concern over this, but it's more, So let's have that discussion point. Let's make sure we're continuing to that conversation. Should we not create preferences view model? The data the hold on. Oh. Maybe what we need to do is the application. Maybe we need to add let's edit this one. Should we not create the preference view model application level and pull the data object out? Right. So again, that's allowed me to review the rest of the PR and go back and modify this, because right now it isn't the place to do that. But now I can put more cohesive thoughts together, right? So from a PR perspective, this is tidier, right? So now I can finish my review. So I don't know where Junicus is. I don't know. So this is the challenge with PRs, right? If I want to accept this and move forward, right, then I have to merge this. I have no choice, right? So in the reality of software development, sometimes that happens, right? So you're going to decide, how do you go and address that later? Now I can do the tidy up, or I can do the organization based upon what I decide, but it's worth the discussion. So I'm going to just add a comment and say, hey, just some thoughts on the design and layout. Maybe we should create a VModels folder, VModels library, and return VMs from within the application layer, right? So we're not really doing any sort of advanced architecture here. We're just doing a simple layered architecture of the API, application services, and then data layer, right? So I'm going to comment that, right? And hopefully Junicus is watching the stream and not just reading it out of context and assuming that I'm just being a difficult reviewer, right? So we kind of have a dependency, right? We can't do oh, this guy's backing out the way now. That's the line down. So I created one for the UI. So we can't do 1 because 11 backs it up, right? Is the time that right? Now I'm getting used to seeing this. It's kind of like, okay, I understand why these things happen, right? I haven't done much in terms of project stuff with GitHub, to be quite frank. New friends group, as usual, I should be able to see my daily progress towards my goal. As usual, I should be able to see friend groups. So I could tackle this one, number 2, without ever touching 1 or 11, right? So maybe I take this one, right? So assign to me, and then move that in progress. So I'm going to tackle number 2, right? Let's create a branch. Feature /2. And again, this is another thing, the standards of naming conventions on branches and stuff. So sometimes it's easier if you do feature, bug fix, etc. from a CI/CD perspective. Sometimes it's easier if you, but you make a convention. Sorry, I was thinking about 2 things at once. You make a convention and you stick to that convention, and this is kind of common to see because you can use feature / as a, hey, you should run CI/CD process on this, like run unit tests, etc. And we will do that later. So having feature slash bug fix slash etc. is useful because you can treat things differently before you even get to that, because this doesn't really matter to you, right? I'm going to try and test with GitHub Desktop, see what this does as far as a workflow right this second. But I'm branching off development, not main, and I'm going to go to that repository. So let's see. Okay, is that where it is? Open in Explorer. No, it's not. Water, drink water. That's where it actually is, right? Right, so that's trying to clone, so that's okay. So I can add existing repository there. Let's see if it now understands that. Let's see. Just from this perspective, just kind of left that all confused, haven't I? Oh, the update is in progress. What update? Uh-oh. Okay. Doesn't really hurt. Okay. So if I go to here now, so I'm using Rider, so it makes it a little bit different. But if you're joining the stream for the first time, if you're on YouTube and you joined, feel free to ask questions. Right? There's nothing about being productive in this. This is all about sharing it with other people and discussing it and going through those steps. So feel free to ask questions. If you want to see the code in Twitch, you can do exclamation water to get access to the repo. It is all shared. Actually, I should modify the title there. That's the common practice, right? I just keep an eye on my dogs. One's kind of sat on the other one's head. A bit of a joke. Okay, so let's go here. I can fetch that, which will give me the feature branch, and then I can check that branch out. Right. Again, if Junikus joins or reviews the PR, then we can kind of discuss it, and that's helpful, right? So we can move that PR forward. Now this does give another challenge, right? I'm about to start more development, and there's a pending PR, which may struggle. I think when I'm doing this project, if ads are showing, I'll slow down a minute and do and kind of tinker versus actually making any great productivity, which isn't going to be great on the VOD. But that's the balance. So we have what are we doing here? What are we doing here? Okay, so we are going to as a user, I should see my daily goal. As a log consumption of water for the day, I make progress towards my goal. I should be able to see if this is a progress bar regardless of what screen I'm on. Okay, so I've kind of merged the two concepts in here, which kind of flies in the face of what I was talking about earlier. In that there's kind of two components to this, and we can talk about whether we tackle that way, right? So the challenge with doing it as one story is from a value perspective, right? I've delivered value because you can now see it in the UI, right? But imagine someone else contributes a UI, and then someone else contributes a UI. So we've got a Vue version, a Svelte version. Let's say we've got one of every flavor. So we've got 5 UIs, let's say. Now doing a story and saying I should see it in a screen, it's kind of difficult, right? So how do I tackle that? Well, then I probably shouldn't, right? I should probably make sure that I keep stories as API and UI so that we can create a UI specific story for every single UI, right? Again, I'm not trying to overcomplicate this process. What I'm trying to do is make sure there's an option there for people to develop their own UIs against the same API. So if you want to practice building a UI, right? Let's say you want to go off and practice React, you can commit a React project to this repo, right? I might not be the best person to review it, right? I could learn, right? But then someone else can come along and tinker with that React version, or they can make their own React version even, right? So at least if the API is there, you can get that practice doing that. If you want to work on the backend pieces, you can work on the backend pieces. You don't have to worry about the way it looks because that's not your concern. So I think that's the benefit of keeping a UI separate from backend, because it makes it cleaner. What are you doing, dogs? I think one dog wants to sit on one thing and the other's there. So he's just sat on it. So anyway, but I'm gonna address this. This should be API only. Updating the UI should be handled as a separate issue. And I'll strike through the other piece, right? Tackling just the API. I'm gonna edit this and I'll strike it through. I think. Can I strike through on this? I'm not used to Markdown. Right through. Tilde. Okay. Huh? What is Markdown? Does it not support it? I'd like Colt. Wow. Thank you very much for the raid. It's a big raid. I'm sat tinkering with the PR and Markdown. Welcome, Raiders. How was your stream, Hardlight? So I will say, welcome. I am currently working on a project to do to help with people wanting to do their first PRs, do their first code commits, etc. Wow, 11-hour stream. That is a monster stream. You are tired. You have to be tired. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I hope you managed to get some good rest today. Thank you. Were you playing? What were you playing? I got tired, hungry, and then I found a new thing of Pokemon Championship I needed to implement. Nice. Okay. Nice. Well, make sure you get some good food. Oh, Tiny Tina's. You know, I have that. Well, I can say this about a lot of games, right? I have that, but I haven't played it yet. Kind of looking for an excuse to play that one. Didn't get the greatest of reviews on landing, so it was like, I'll put that off. But I get to say that about a lot of games. I collect the games and then they sit on a shelf for a while. So I have a lot of sealed games that I need to get through my backlog. Cool. So I am currently working on this application for tracking water consumption. This is a beginner-friendly project, is my goal, allowing people to kind of take the pieces they want to take, and if they're new to coding, they can do a little bit. If they're more experienced, we can have larger discussions. So it's aimed at being just an all-round friendly project to join for the first time. It's worth the time. I love Borderlands and didn't like 3 much, so I avoided that one for a while and fear it was like 3. Just a good callback to 2 and it's very neat. Oh, nice. Okay. I like 2. So maybe I'll give that a try one day. Yeah, I do have it, right? That's so awesome. I'm interested by code, but it's intimidating to say the least. Projects like this are cool. Yeah, the goal is one of, right. So obviously, I'm an experienced developer. I've done this for a long time. Actually, I have Tiny Tina's on the Xbox. Yeah. So I've done this for a long time, and one of the things that I like to do is try and share. You know, I'm streaming it, right? So I like to share what I'm doing, but in the same, I think that this sort of project can help people pick and choose which pieces they want to do, right? So they don't have to tackle everything. They don't have to be super experienced. They can do a little bit, and also it gets the chance for developers maybe are just starting out to be able to say, hey, I did a PR, right, and go through that process and kind of learn from that process, because that's again something that is a very useful job skill. So there's more to it than just the code. You know, committing documentation, contributing in general is just something that this is open to. So that's what I'm kind of aiming it for, because I work on a larger project, and that project is not open source, so people can't just come in and look at the code and tinker with it, etc. So I want to make it friendlier than that. Want to make it friendlier than that? Wow, maybe I'm more tired than I thought. But yeah, that's the goal. I always have ideas. I always have projects that I could do or tinker with, etc. I actually spent a lot of my weekend tinkering with Unreal Engine, because games is kind of in my name, right? Games are fascinating. I would love to develop a game, and I have some ideas. But it's just spending that time to sit down and develop those things, and to do that on the stream is a little harder, right? Because that's a lot. I don't mind struggling a little. I don't mind struggling a lot at times, but struggling all the time on stream, that's more energy sapping than people might imagine. I love that. It's awesome that you care and want to share. What ideas for games would you like to do someday? Well, my favorite sort of games are city builders, right? Yeah. Kenny's easily distracted as well. I think that's definitely a trait of our generations, or the way we are with society right now. But I love city builders. My first experience of those sorts of games was games like Railroad Tycoon on the Commodore Amiga back in the 90s. Theme Park is also a good one. I mean, I know it's not a city builder as such, but it is a building game. It is that sort of game, and they fascinate me. So ideally, my sort of game would be one like more like A Train. I love the idea of building those financial systems and those economic systems that allow you to really create something and make it grow and evolve, and tackle those things. So that would be my ideal game. But I am not big brain enough to even develop that sort of stuff. So if I was going to develop a game today, I would probably go with a platformer or a shoot 'em up. I took an idea for a platformer that I'm kind of thinking. That's what I'm thinking with Unreal 4, because I think the camera stuff in Unreal could make it look really cool. That kind of, what is it called? There's a name for the 2D, 3D projection stuff. So I have some ideas around that. And if I get it to a point, maybe I do a stream or two on a weekend of game dev. But being there can just move a character around. That's not fascinating. Other city builders, my last big one was a theme park builder. I can't, yeah. Parkitect. What's the other one? There's another one that's Park Beyond. Yeah, there you go. There's a few of them at the same time, in the same vein, that came out. And things like what's it called? 2 Point Academy and 2 Point Hospital. Those are great games as well. You know, they're fascinating. Civ 5 is very good. Yeah, Civ 5 is a great game. I do I have a large games collection that I need to get through. Right. So I've got a bit of a backlog I need to go through and do that. So one day I will get to sit and play some of these games. Oh, I'm going to deny that comment because I keep the language to a PG, or not even a PG level in the stream, just because it's open. But yeah, Civ 5 is a is a great game. I've put a few dozen hours into Civ 5, that's for certain. Yeah. I wonder what Civ 7 is going to be, considering that 4X games have kind of really accelerated in the last couple of years. There's a lot of 4X games out there. I mean, you know, and you've got games, what's it called? The name's right, stuck on the tip of my tongue. You've got some big games, and then games that have just expanded it and just added new civilizations in and grown. You know, so there's definitely a Civ 7 is going to be an interesting one. There's a lot of differences in Civ 6 that I just didn't. It took me a long time to get around because they departed from some of the norms. Okay, I could sit and talk games all day, but I'm gonna try and get back on track with this. And yeah, let's continue. So what I was talking about, and again, thank you so much for the raid. That is awesome. I really do appreciate it, Hardlight. So obviously this project is the one I'm focused on today. I do the bigger project I work on 3 days a week is a little less friendly. It's a little bit more intimidating to anyone that hasn't seen that sort of stuff. But but as always, my stream is not about getting stuff done. It's not necessarily about the coding even. It's about growth and learning, and making sure that I'm expanding my horizons by conversing about software, because I think that's where we fall down when we get into this pattern of I think I know everything, therefore I can just do my thing. Opening your mind to, hey, there's a different way of doing that. I think that's the benefit of streaming, whether it's game dev, or even just regular streaming. You get to have some of your opinions and thoughts tested every day, every time you open your mouth, right? Okay, so we're going to tackle this as an API only issue. I should be able to see my daily progress. So this project is, start it up, and it's going to look very rough right this second because that's the deliberate. I want to say, hey, I've drunk some water, right? I'm tracking my water consumption, and this is actually inspired by a little bit of a push on my own, myself and my daughter, to consume more water during the day. And ironically, I don't actually have any water right now. The goal is to try and make it a little bit more motivational. So in the first phase, I want to track, hey, I've drank 24 ounces of water, right? And obviously that's not showing anywhere. That's not telling me anything right now. So this story is to try and show, hey, you set a target. Here's how much you've drunk towards that target, right? In percentage. And then the next story would pick up and show it somewhere on the screen, either here or here, whatever. This isn't the final UI. This is kind of just the UI to test all these pieces together, right? And the goal is that if you are a front-end developer, if you want to go and put a UI on this, you can go and create a UI using the tools and use the same API, right? And it should be able to hook into that and just work. So, and if you need help with doing that, if you want to, fork the repository, go off and try and tinker with it and make it work, and you can't do it, we can go and look at that repository and we can help walk through how you might get it on track and fix those things up. So, it's that is the goal. So what I'm working on right now is the first piece, which is to allow tracking that I've said I've drank 24. We've got another PR ready for getting this data out, but I've drank 24 and I've said I want to drink, 128 in the day. Right? So I've drank water or whatever. Is it SQLLite for the DB you're using? Hi, Saras, welcome. Yes, it is. So to make this friendlier for people just checking out the project, it can do the migrations as well. So it will do did I get it working? Yeah, apply migration. So if you're running it in development, it will actually create the database the first time you start the application and run the migrations. So we're using Entity Framework migrations, but it will run them for you when you start up. And that way we don't have to require anyone to set up their own database or storage, etc. And if you're interested on YouTube, I think there's in the panel below, there's links to the TBD Friends repository. Let me actually check that. I don't want to bring that up live on actual stream. Wrong browser. That one. Cool. Yeah. So, that's the goal. The goal is very much of ease of use. You can tinker it, you can take the code, you can do whatever you want with it. github.com, TBD friends, water, drink, water, I believe is the actual repo. Yeah. Yeah. I've updated the panel on YouTube to make sure that's there. So the link to this repository is in the card for this. So I'm on my branch and I need to, what do I need to do? Yeah, if there's any questions, if there's any thoughts, opinions, you know, please feel free, right? You know, this project is not one of we need to make it successful. It's one of collaboration and discussion. So any discussion, especially pertaining to this particular, is definitely relevant. And also, if you have general questions about development, etc., that we can talk about, more than welcome to ask. So I'm not afraid of talking about things, as long as they're on the topic of this, you know, on topic for stream. So we need an API to show the daily progress, right? So there's a few challenges here, right? What if I don't have any preferences, right? Where do I put this is another challenge. So some of the design of the code is deliberately rough. It's kind of thrown together in a rough style, which actually isn't too far off what a lot of developers will do, especially if they're new to development, and they're trying to follow some practices and principles. They may throw something together that's similar to this, right? So it's aimed at not being a very difficult application, but it's aimed at being kind of an interpretation as such, right? So the goal is I can show there's layers, right? So we have an API layer and we have an application layer and a data layer, right? The data layer has access to the database. The application layer is kind of joining those two things together, and the API talks to the application layer. So it's just a straight up, right? Not complicated architecture. It's not something that is going to hurt your brain, but you know, that's the goal. So this story, as simple as it may seem, right? As a user, I should be able to log. I should be able to see my daily progress towards my goal. May seem simple, but what does it involve? Well, it involves querying and summing your current log, right? So in the data, I'll go show the data on stream right now. So we have logs, right? And logs are per user, the fluid ounces drunk and consumed on. This is UTC. We have preferences, which is for a user, the total target fluid ounces they want to drink in that day. So to get my total consumption, I have to figure out I'm not just summing fluid ounces, right? I'm saying, hey, for this given day, right? And again, UTC, what is today is a great challenge, right? Dates and times always make programming hard, right? So I'm not going to get this perfect. I know full well I'm not going to get this perfect. So we're going to write some tests around this. We're actually going to write some unit tests to try and verify it and prove the behavior, so that when we do write the actual code or put the code in place, we can trust it a little bit more. So we are going to do really unit testing here. It's the most practical way of doing this. So we need to say, okay, well, what are my preferences, and do my preferences exist? Because if there are no preferences, then any consumption is 100% of your target, right? Because you've maxed out your target, right? So what do we want to do there, right? And then maybe that's a discussion we can have as far as rules go, as far as structure goes, because maybe that's not what we want to say. We want to say you're at 0% of your target because you've not set a target. Or maybe we want to indicate there is no progress. Therefore, why bother calculating anything? So there's a few ways we can go at this. So what might seem like a simple story because I've put one line in there has a whole bunch of rules. Right? So if you were discussing this with your PM, right, or your product owner, etc., then as I log consumption of water throughout the day, I make progress towards my goal. Right? There's a discussion you want to kind of have there, right? You want to make sure you're pushing back and asking some more pertinent questions, right? What do I do? I have no preferences. What value should I see? Data is stored as UTC. I mean, hey, Judicus, welcome. What do I think about how to word what I'm going to say? That concern, right? What is a day is not a concern of the PM or the PO, whatever, right? That is a concern of you as a developer to figure out, okay, you know what a day is, right? You need to adapt all the date times of the data to the users, right? To the current date time. We don't know what time zone the user is in, so we have to assume the server date time, right? But again, this is all part of the challenge, right? What is a day? Right? So that point of discussion needs to be raised because we don't know what the user's date time is, right? So, Yusuf, good day. How are you doing? Oh, okay, I was just trying to check because I've got the YouTube chat up at the same time right in a second, and I've got a chat on OBS to join the two together so I can see them in context. And I saw the one appear on YouTube, and then about 8 seconds later, yeah, no, 5 seconds. Okay, so this is a point to discuss, right? What is a day? Because we don't store user's time zone, right? So you need to make sure you're kind of clarifying that, right? Well, I'm good. Okay, this is already doing what I kind of intended it to do. So, can't we store dates in UTC and let the browser convert to local time? So we put the calculation on the client. So if we do it that way, we have to pull all the logs for the user forever down to the client. Or plus minus 24 hours, or come up with time window that we pull for so that you can always get that. I mean, I know we're not talking about hundreds of logs. But then we put the calculation requirement on the client, and now we've got an API that just pulls down data for you. So there's no, hey, tell me my goal, right? And if we do it that way, if we're comparing other users, do we pull down all the other users' data to your client and then do the same sum? So if you're in a friends group, right, that's the kind of the goal, right? The goal is a friends group has shared goals, and you're not meant to see what they consume versus what their target is. That's not the goal. That the goal is to say progress towards, like the percentage. So in my mind, that is very much a server requirement, and then we say, hey, return 50%, return 80%, etc. So I'm so glad you came along and asked that. So if we make the client decide the percentage, then we still have to pull down a window of data, right? So we still have to pull down something, right? We can't pull down everything because the app will get slower and slower and slower as you add more and more data, right? So we can't just pull down everything. When we're comparing it with other people, which is the inspiration for this was very much one of, hey, I'm 50% towards my goal of water usage, and we can put in some. We can talk about the healthy requirements there because obviously there's other rules involved. You don't just want to say, 8 o'clock in the morning, hey, I drank 128 fluid ounces of water. Probably not good for you, right? Not that I want to get into the telling people what is good for them. That's not. We need to stay clear of that part. But in general, some good practices aren't going to hurt anybody, right? But you don't want to then have to say, okay, well, if I've got a friends group of 5 or 6 people or whatever, pull down all their data for the same day and do all their calculations on the client as well. Because the goal is one of privacy, right? That I should never know that my friend has set 48 fluid ounces of water as their goal because, each person is different. The goal is not one of, I drank more, it's I hit my targets, right? It's motivational rather than competition. So to me, it feels very much like a server-bound requirement, right? So to that end, one of my dogs is being very curious today. Just sat with his head upright, looking around. Yeah, to that end, then I think that this is a server requirement, but being that we don't capture the user's time zone, like we could send that up, right? There's nothing saying we can't make the calculation on the server. When we make the request, we could actually capture the time zone of the user, right? So if we assume we have a time zone, then we can calculate everything based off a requested time zone. That would be a way of doing that. So then in the API, we just say, hey, you must provide time zone information. I'm open to thoughts. I'm not trying to decide how everything's done. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm verbalizing some of those things. So again, right now we end up in our consumption service. I'm not worried about dumping things into these things right now because I think later on we can discuss, okay, is there a cleaner way of describing this? Gina, because I did, obviously, you might have seen the comments on the PR. That is not deliberately to be difficult. That was purely built around demonstrating a discussion that might go on because we haven't talked about standards, we haven't talked about naming conventions, we haven't talked about code organization. These are things that are, as we have experienced before, right? It can be people can do things very differently. I do need to take a quick break. My apologies. It looks like one of my dogs needs to go out. I will go and walk him out, and I will be right back. Okay, my apologies for that. Two dogs that definitely needed to go out, and yeah. Okay, so I'm going to make some progress on this piece. Obviously, nothing's set in stone, and that's kind of the goal, right? We can always change things later. Now, one of the things, the benefits of doing it the way I'm about to do it is we can keep the API doing the things the API can do and keep them consistent. If we push rules down to the client, we have to re-implement that logic on the client every single time. And any logic on the client is, depending on how you look at it, if you're building an application and you're building one UI, then is that really that harmful? I don't know. But it is something worth considering. Like, where do you put the logic? So something like a calculation, right? If it's server-side calculated, then A, it'll be faster. B, we lower the transfer of data, right? If we go with the client side right this second, I'm not completely dismissing the idea. It's more, if we go with the client side right now, then we have to decide, how do we decide what data we need to send out to the client, because we still have to think about limiting it. So I'm going to say we do it on the server. Right now, we can either use the server time, and I'm trying to capture these things in here. What is the day? We don't store these as time zone. What do I do if I have no preferences? What value should I see? These are questions that you should ask as you're going forward. So if a PM is presenting a story, or PO is presenting a story, I keep mixing up the roles, right? But a product person is representing the story to you, and it's light on those sorts of things. Those are the things you should be picking up on, right? Those are the things you should be saying, hey, what about this? Those implicit rules that people love to just skip over because it's easy. I want that, right? It's very easy for me to say I want something, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to get what I want. So you should make sure that you push back, you ask the right questions, you stop and pause and think, okay, what is the right way of doing this? What do I need to get this job done properly? Not just get it done quickly, right? That's not always what software is about, right? So how am I going to track this, right? I'm going to follow a naming convention that I use. It doesn't mean that it's the right way. It means it's a way, and it's, again, open to discussion, which is why I'm jumping in and just doing it, because it moves us forward, but also it's something we can talk about. Okay. When requesting progress and no preferences set, right? I'm trying to here start building upon making sure that we track that behavior, right? So I'm trying to start from the tests, and I want to build the failure case first as such, right? That's just again, I honestly believe there's some preferences to testing. You don't have to follow what other people tell you to do. One of the things you should be confident of, and this matters more, is that your tests have value. Right? That's over everything. That's what matters the most, right? Do your tests have value? Are they actually validating the real code, or are they just giving you the answers you want to have? So pause, think about what you're doing there. Right? Again, if you have any thoughts, questions, opinions on this part, please feel free. We can discuss this. You can do PRs. We can do all manner of things. So, okay, what should I see? Well, that's kind of the question, right? What do I do if I have no preferences? What value should I see? Am I 100% with nothing? I'm a 100% with everything, with one log. What am I? What am I testing here? Well, I'm testing right now. I'm going to test an application service, right? We're going to test this application service, this consumption service, and so that's my subject. I know what I'm going to test. I think that you are always 0%, right? So I'm going to make that assumption, right? Result is 0, right? That's what I expect to come out of this, right? So let's have our private consumption service subject, right? That is our thing. I think I followed my. Actually, I didn't. I did a range at to certain here. Okay, so I'm not going to modify this to be my style quite yet. I'm going to make sure that I kind of make it more traditional. So we don't need that there, basically. We need that in here. So var subject equals new consumption service. Consumption service. And that requires a repository. So we're going to use end substitute. So we need a substitute for I consumption repository. We're going to inject that. And yeah, something like that, right? Now we don't want to. We know some things, right? I'm not going to pretend that we don't know some things, right? So I honestly think it's kind of silly to not acknowledge what you know to some extent, but also you shouldn't just run ahead and add code. That's kind of unit testing's problem, right? When you run ahead and say, well, I'm going to need this, 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 I need this, and I'm going to, you kind of already predetermined what you're going to do. So why not go write the code? That's what most arguments are against unit testing, right? But in reality, what you need to make sure of is that you're validating why you need those things. So you don't want to just be stuffing things in, right? Was setting the preferences as it was done on purpose, was that for a default value to add a new entry? Or was that the goal? Setting preferences. Set preferences. Which part? No. Setting the as it was done on purpose, was that? Not sure I follow wholly. The code you had to set the preferences just sets an amount for fluid answers, and there was an issue about getting that back into the settings screen. Right. Yeah, because right now, fluid answers is all we know about, right? And again, I'm kind of doing somewhat the quickest way possible and deliberately not putting some thought to some things so that I'm not overthinking the problem. So that we can have discussions. So the issue is, obviously, I had set preferences, but never had get preferences. There was no default here right? I'm okay with it being null. I don't have an issue with that one. You looking at the PR? Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. So the yeah, I'll leave you to add your comments, but yeah, I kind of the preferences was kind of like, okay, let's allow you to set the preferences. I didn't even think that far ahead deliberately to, because again, if I try and overthink this, I'm going to try and design this, and if I try to design this, I'm going to put structure to it, and then it kind of defeats the purpose. And the purpose is one of very much a, you know, I don't agree with that, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with that, and I think I'm going to get more of that if I just stuff things in there when I need to, and have these moments of, hey, I'm going to unit test this, right? And here's the challenges this poses. So yeah, we'll when you've added the points, we'll go back to that and do that review. So anyone new joining the stream, whether on YouTube or on Twitch, this is a beginner friendly, I'll say, right, project, in that you don't have to be an experienced developer to work in this. This is all open source. It's something you can download and tinker with. The goal is, over the course of the streams, to build up an understanding, a shared understanding of what it is we're trying to build. If you're wanting to tinker with UI and put it against an existing API, there's that option. If you want to tinker with the back end and develop some API components, there's that option as we develop more requirements, etc. If you just want to hang out and talk about software development, that's an option too, right? So feel free to talk. You know, you do not have to be knowledgeable about what I'm doing. You do not have to be able to say, well, I do this and I do that, right? You don't have to explain that. You can ask a question as well. So I'm trying to make sure that is abundantly clear, because you know, I think some people get intimidated, especially if someone's more experienced or is more authoritative speaking about it. Again, why I kind of threw code in there. I think it puts them off. So I'm always open to learning new ways of presenting and new ways of discussing these things. So anyway, and you can get to this repository for this code in Twitch by !water, and it is in the cards below on YouTube. And all these videos do make it to YouTube, so they're all recorded up there, so you can watch them back later if you want to. Seems to be the more popular option for YouTube. So I'm going to call this get progress, and this is a result, and what this number is magic right now. I'll assume my user ID, right? So let's set a user ID. User ID equals 1. Right. And assert dot equal result 0. Right. So my expected 0 result. Expected and actual. Right. Expected 0. Okay. Okay. Let's run our test. Yeah, test passes. We win. Right. So now we need to create the better scenario. So we've kind of put the structure in for the test. We've got the code pieces working. We've done the bare minimum to get this test to run and pass, right? Yes, I could have left the throw in there, right? So being pragmatic, I'm like, I know that that's going to pass, right? So I know that I'm not going to, so there's a common pattern of red, green refactor. So you first get the failure, then you get then you work to make it pass, and then you worrying about cleaning the code up. If you don't want to, you go back to the start to get your next test. So I could have got a red there by putting a throw not implemented. Right now, maybe I'm not in the total spirit of that, but I could have made it go red and then I could have made it pass. But I knew this was going to make it pass. I'm okay with that. Right? I'm not cheating myself because I understand what it is I've done. Okay, so let's go on and say when requesting progress and goal set. So I haven't used the correct language there, or have I? Right? What am I actually explaining? Well, I'm aiming for the goal, right? That's what I'm after about. So this one, and no preferences set. Well, is the preference and my goal one and the same? Well, right now they are, right? The language is still, I should be focused on the goal, not on the preferences. The preferences is where I store the goal, right? That can be explained in the code that is where the goal is, but I'm focused on the goal here, not the preferences. So when requesting progress and no goal set, right? So that's really what I want to explain, right? So in here, when requesting progress and goal set, now there's a few scenarios. I have no actual progress. I do have progress, right? So no actual progress, right? If I'm being honest, no actual progress is going to be pretty much the same as no goal, right? We know that's going to be the case, but we should still write it, right? Because we need to document the fact that that can be a thing, right? So this isn't my normal testing style. This is a bit beyond, a bit different to my normal style, because obviously there's a few things here, and no logs have been entered, right? So we're going to do our repository, right? Our repository equals new equals substitute for high consumption repository. Progress is 0. I was missing the kind of outcome of that one. I was telling it the further refinement, right? I need our subject. SUT, subject, system under test, subject under test, whatever. That's a common naming convention to say this is the thing I'm focused on in unit testing, right? In unit testing, you shouldn't be testing 5 different things at once. You shouldn't be testing 10 different methods at once. You should be kind of focused on usable, consumable components that are doing a thing, and you can test that thing, right? If you're trying to test 5 things at once, then the likelihood is you're going to end up with a bit of a mess, right? Consumption service repository, right? And then actually let's create a user ID. User ID equals 1, right? Using single digit numbers when you're doing this sort of stuff as well can trip you up a little bit. In this case, it's not going to be too difficult because I'm going to whatever, but you can end up with a situation where you don't understand the data you're looking at, right? Because you've used one, like user ID 1, company 1, thing 1, object 1, and then you look at the data and it's like 1, 1, 1, 1. Which one are you talking about? Have you swapped numbers? You don't know. So it's often better to use very different numbers. So something more like 1001, and then our company ID equals 2002, right? And it'll stand out visually if you're looking at the data. Right. For this purpose, user ID 1 is fine. Canny, good day. Thank you very much for the look. Appreciate it. So again, result equals subject, but get progress user ID. and then assert equal. So if I run this now, it passes. But this is the same as no preferences, right? So how does that work? So temptingly, it would be tempting, sorry, not temptingly. It would be tempting to go into that code right now and make it work because of that scenario. That's the wrong thing to do. I didn't need to make it not work by adding new code, and then if that still passes, awesome, right? But I shouldn't be writing the code to fix that problem. I should be focused on my next test, right? And a thing, right? Because in that test as well, I've kind of broken the rules a little bit. I haven't really defined what the preferences are, right? I haven't done any of that. Log has been made, should return percentage of goal, right? Again, I'm open to discussion. I'm open to discussing, my naming convention. I'm open to discussing what I'm testing, how I'm testing it, etc. That's the point of learning, right? So again, to make it clearer, this is a range. This is act. This is right. That's how unit tests kind of work, right? You arrange them, you then do the thing that needs to be tested, and then you verify the output, no matter however you do that. Okay. So in this case, I'm going to copy these 3 lines, right? Because I'm going to need them time and time and time again, right? In my act, I'm going to do the same thing, right? Right. Bar result equals subject dot get progress. But now the difference is the assert, right? What am I asserting? Well, so a good way of doing this is to make sure that you are in control of all the parameters, right? If you are in control of all the parameters and you know what data needs to be tested, right? Or what thing needs to be tested, then you can kind of then the result should be clear. A success or failure shouldn't be kind of down to a calculation or interpretation of data, right? So, and a log has been made should return percentage of goal, right? So if I say the goal is 10 and I've logged 1, right? Or the goal is 100 and I've logged 10. This does not need to represent actual data, right? And if you make it represent actual data, you might actually convince someone of a certain behavior because they'll read the numbers in there, or they'll read into that data. So you want to make sure the data is as clear as possible that it's just test data, right? So when you're putting names in, don't put silly names in your test data. That sort of thing is something I've done without a doubt. I've had lots of fun making really weird test data, right? If I'm making data, if I'm creating data for actually just verifying integration stuff, I will create messy data but that goes through the real system, right? So that's a different challenge. But when I'm doing unit tests, I kind of tend to label things so that you visually can make them out quickly, and they become obvious that they're a problem. So if you have first name as a potential field, you don't call it, some silly name, you call it first name, because then if someone sees that data in the test results as a failure, it's obvious, even if it just gets output, that is the field that failed, right? You don't want to have to go and interpret those results. So controlling your test data is just as important when you're writing the unit test as setting it up. So what do I need? Well, I need to say repository dot I need to get preferences. I need Unicus's PR. Because I've put it in there. I need a PR. Hi, Shai. Welcome. How you doing? Ha ha ha. Ha, that hurts. I just spilled coffee. 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. My wrist went on the coffee and I slipped, so I spilled coffee on myself. Oh well. Well, testing in general, I always have trouble with testing. Testing is not the easiest things to do, right? Testing is a discipline, but it can have great value, right? As long as you are kind of sticking to it, right? So in this instance, what I've just realized is I have a dependency that I should have realized going into it that I cannot mock, right? Like everything else, unit testing is something that you want to practice, right? You don't just want to assume you're bad at it because it was difficult, and it's easy to go past it. It's easy to try and rush past and make it kind of work. But I have a challenge right this second, and I have to tackle Unicus's PR, merge that in, and then cherry pick that, or rebase my branch off of dev, which is something else I do not like doing. So let's go look at the PR. I test my project too much by running it and see if it works. I mean, that is a common way of testing, right? And that is the way that a lot of people will do testing, because they'll verify it works with what they know, right? But you only have to have met a QA person to know that they can be chaotic, right? They'll test things that you didn't think you would test, right? There's lots of long-standing memes over those pieces. I like unit testing because I think it gives me more confidence that the code is going to work. Oftentimes I'll write unit tests and then just wire things up and I'll never struggle, right? So I definitely believe unit testing has some great value. Hey, how goes the development today? Yo, Patrick, welcome. Development goes okay. We are working on the viewer-friendly project. Our viewer beginner-friendly. I can't decide what it is exactly. On some level, manual testing will always need to happen, but automated testing is always good to have. Yeah. Absolutely. Manual testing can't be avoided, and integration testing is pretty much my goal in the long term for most of my projects. Writing integration tests just takes a significant amount of time. There's lots of diagrams out there. If you look at the complexity to value of things, integration testing has a great deal of value, but it's highly complicated to get it set up correctly and to get it repeatable. Right? It's easy for me to forget how to write those tests since I don't use those tests a lot. Yeah, I mean, like everything, it takes practice, it takes time, repetition. It's funny. I do karate. Well, I do martial arts. I wouldn't say it's not pure karate, but a lot of the same principles apply, right? If I don't do it for 2 weeks, it gets rusty, right? So you have to keep repeating the same things, practicing. You get better at writing code by writing code, and not closing your mind to learning new things. So it's yeah. So this project is very much one. I mean, it is C#, it is .NET. It's being built to support anyone looking to do this for the first time, right? If you want to make PRs, if you want to go through this process, this review process, if you want to go through that, you can do. The UI is built to be, I've built a UI mainly as a demonstrator. If you want to put a UI against this API and just use the API, you can do that. So feel free to check it out if you want. Okay, so I need Unicus's PR now because I've picked up a story that has a dependency upon that work, right? Maybe I also need to learn it's a good way. School kind of throws into testing without much help. See, that's not very great. I don't agree with, if you're going to teach something, teach it properly, or teach it with enough to give the confidence to move forward, right? School is never going to teach you everything. But they should at least give you the tools to go forward with confidence and grow. So, but anyway, I could rant about that for a while. I didn't do school, so. So let's go back in context of the actual changes here. Okay, so earlier in the stream, I kind of went through this PR, but for the benefit of people joining now, I'll go through it again. So we haven't talked about coding standards. We haven't talked about how we write things, how we name things, all these different sorts of things. So when you start working on a project with other people, you are going to come up against personal preference, and there's a pragmatic middle ground somewhere in this, right? In a normal organization, you will have standards thrown at you and say, this is the standards you should follow, right? In most organizations, the standards are lax or very rarely followed because people come in and have their own preferences. They're not enforced. And it's up to a team to kind of make sure that things are being enforced, right? If I say that variables should start with a Q, right? Great. Go ahead and do that in your own code, but you don't do it in the shared code, right? That's a personal preference that should not creep through. But if I try, that should be discussed and agreed upon. That is not the way we write the code. So here we go. Here's how we write the code. I'm not going to go to the extent of necessarily putting in coding guidelines and practices right now, because I think that's more obstructive to the nature of this project. But it is something that I'm going to use as a discussion point. So I'm not picking on anything. I'm not objecting to it very much here. I'm just being realistic about things, right? So one of the things I talked about here is we haven't really discussed naming conventions yet, but is there any need for this class to be outside of the containing class, refer to logging post endpoint? So what I've done so far in the code is when I go to the API here, in this endpoint, I've created these classes and they're nested under this parent class, right? Or under the class they are used in. They're not used outside the class, right? They're used as incoming and outgoing data, right? So is there much value in having them as actual classes taking up folder space? The more something sits out there, especially generalized like parameters or response, people are going to add things in there, right? People aren't going to know. So the system is not kind of keeping itself clean, right? Because people will, over time, go and manipulate things there. So at this point, it can be inside the class. We can refactor it to live there, but maybe that is not the best design in the long run. We might move the models to a separate shared class. The client and the API both talk of the same models, right? And again, this is kind of where we got to, because I was kind of going through the process of doing the code review. You should kind of start a code review if you're going through a big PR rather than just adding single comments, because I might make a comment like that, and then the next thing, oh yeah, that would be a better way. So my comment is kind of lost in the mix if I just randomly throw a comment out there. So is this method really preferences or fluid analysis? Should we not create the preferences view model at the application level and pull the data object out? Because again, get preferences which is turning int. Agree that the naming is confusing. In the API layer, we use models, and inside them we have properties that are more descriptive, but then in the application layer, there's just values. We should probably add models that are more descriptive in the application layer should we also move the preferences into its own service in the application layer, right? So Junikus is very much playing along in this instance, not deliberately, by the way, but Junikus knows how I work and what I'm trying to achieve here. So Junikus is very much playing along with me in this regard, right? So again, highlighting the fact there's a need for a larger discussion here. We don't want to just be, yeah, throw this code in there, put it in there, because we're going to start getting things confused. So highlighting again, there's a need for a more specific service around preferences. So we have this, and then we have this. Okay, now I'm just going to agree to these points, right? I agree. However, in the name of forward progress, I need this PR. So what do? If I create this PR, I'm going to create technical debt, right? Where do I fix that, right? SQLLite, mate, welcome. Thank you for the follow. Appreciate it. Where do I fix this? Because if I take this on, we are in agreement, there is some things to fix. There's some things to clean up in this process, right? So where do I do that? Right, I can't, rejecting the PR. Yeah, by the way, when I do PRs, I like to have codes so there is a discussion over something. A PR can always be dropped. Yeah. And I think pragmatically, we can address some of these things very quickly in my code and then drop this PR is kind of where I'm heading here. Because I don't think it harms anything in the long term. We can address some of these issues, right? Because I'm going to have to do it anyway, right? I think. I mean, let me know if you disagree, but I think realistically what I need to do is just take this code, and the rest of it I can kind of drop, right? And then we can create a view models library and tidy this up. Because if I take this through, I'm going to introduce technical debt that we know we need to address, right? So I would rather work together, because you've identified the actual code that needs to be done. I'd rather work together in this way and get this through than I would try and merge, mess around with PR, mess around with merge conflict, potential merge conflicts, etc. That gets dangerous when I can just pull this code and take it that way. So I could, if this was an individual commit, this is another reason why individual commits can be helpful as well, by the way. If this was an individual commit as an endpoint, I could actually cherry pick this commit and then build the rest of it out. That would be an option. So you don't have to waste things. As it stands, all this is one commit. So yeah. So I'm going to resolve that, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually not going to accept this PR. I'm going to take the code from, well, actually first, I'm going to do one thing. So unit testing isn't something we're going to necessarily do for everything right this second, because I don't want to put that requirement upon people, because I think that's intimidating. It is there if you want to do it, but it's not a requirement of the project. And maybe I should make that clear as well. Because again, I want this to be a practice, right? Change both the application layer and the API, yeah. So I think I'm just going to pull the code for the endpoint and then piece these pieces back in. I think it's more practical to do it that way, but I'll do it as a single commit. So I have a dependency upon another story. I've picked up a story that I really should have sat down and thought about beforehand, because maybe I would have branched off of Junikus's branch, or maybe I would have worked together and cherry picked some pieces over that I needed. Once you do that sort of stuff, though, you don't forget, then you make a dependency upon all manner of things, because now my changes and his changes are intertwined, and yeah, so it gets messier. So it's always worth the truth is it's always worth communicating and making sure that you are clear about what the outcome will be. And it will still go wrong, right? Source control is great. It is something I would never do without in software development. But again, like everything else, it takes a bit of discipline. It takes a little bit of conversation, and sometimes just standards and practices along the way. So let me go over here. Make sure I get this code. I'm going to view the code. Good. I'm going to take this as it stands right this second. And it went in as a get endpoint. Good. So I'm going to create get. Add that. Paste that in. Right. We're not going to take this. Right. We're going to remove that out right this second. And we're going to do a bit of refactoring. Right. Because the theme of this is valid. The pieces of the code need to change. So I think for right now, we'll introduce a view models project, which will give us some way of interpreting data from the database into a model that then can be passed down to the client. Right? Did I create a source folder for this? I did. And we'll call that view models. Okay. Now, again, I'm more explicit. I don't like shortening things. That's again a preference. This could be preferences VM, view model, right? I'm going to be explicit right this second. Again, it's not something that I really need to worry too much about. We can obviously discuss that in greater depth at a later point. But just to move this piece forward, we can obviously talk about that. This is no longer nullable because this object will be nullable now. Right? If we don't have preferences, we're getting nothing back. Preferences, view model. And again, if you have any strong opinions either way on that particular piece, feel free to share them. Right? The Discord is always there as well. I'm more than happy to continue these sorts of discussions. And actually, over the weekend, myself, Dota, and George Smileyface actually had a pretty good discussion regarding story pointing. Right? What does it mean? Why do we use it? What value does it have? Where does it break down, etc.? We kind of all presented different pieces, and it was a really fun discussion. And kind of, I put together some pieces. Actually have a document that I'm working on as to why I'm doing my main project, the Liquid Sky Agile project platform. Why I think that I know what I'm doing there and why I think I can improve things. And I shared that as well, the draft of that, because it was something that I wanted to share. So let's copy that. Yeah, I'm more than happy to start these sorts of discussions. On the topic of naming convention and structure, not to derail what you're talking about with the PR, but how do you feel about really long variable class names? Sometimes I get response classes that are like 30 characters long. Do you share an aversion to helper classes? I've read several opinion articles over the past few years saying you have a class that is best named with helper or manager, etc., and you haven't designed your code to be fully functionally organized. Unicus, I have to go to work. I'll check the code afterwards. Yep, no worries. Thank you. Thank you very much, Unicus, as always. Thank you for everything. How do I feel about real long? I have no challenge if it's descriptive, right? I'd prefer to be able to read something and understand what it's doing straight away. Now, saying there's no hard rule on helper or manager, right? And Microsoft kind of gave us some tooling around that anyway, right? So helper classes are normally made to do like add-on functionality, right? I don't have any in this one. Let me open the main project, the Liquid Sky project quickly. Window. So this is a bit more of an intimidating project in terms of size. So my apologies to jump to this, but Microsoft kind of gave us a way around helper packages when they created extensions, right? So these are just extension methods, right? This is your standard helper class now, right? So extending your class, right? That's the way I look at helpers, right? When it comes to manager, I get why people would say that's a bad practice, but sometimes you kind of need to lump some things together, right? General rules, if the naming is getting too crazy, then maybe you're doing a little bit too much in a single class. That's worth considering. But again, I think I named something yesterday. I can't remember what the actual name was, but I have no aversion to long names. I think it was something like webhook user profile provider, right? Again, providers like manager, right? It's another word that people might be averse to, but why? What am I doing there, right? I don't have a problem with them. I find them simply as useful functional organizers. But these articles, in the .NET web space, were vehemently against the existence of them. I can find the articles if you like. Yeah, you're more than welcome. If you jump in the Discord and drop it in there, in the learning things, or even in general, those are all obviously good things to discuss. I'm reminding of a phrase, and I'm not going to use it on the stream because it's something that it's not very. I run a kind of PG stream deliberately, but opinions are like everyone has one, right? That phrase is appropriate. When it comes to software development, I think pragmatism wins over everything, right? If I'm working in a code base, if you can work with me and we can develop something good that we agree is good and clean and maintainable, right? That matters more to me than whether someone says it's right or wrong, right? That will always matter more to me, because I think productivity is what everyone's after anyway. At the end of the day, everyone's after productivity. And sometimes you have to make a mistake to understand your mistake. So not being opposed to reflecting back on what you've done and saying, oh, that was wrong. I shouldn't do it that way. Here, I can clean it up. I know how to clean this up. But I also wonder if I think about classes wrong, or I use them in an older style as a container more than a functional tool in its own right. That generally can happen, because that functional style is very useful, right? Let me kind of, this is a little bit of a diversion in terms of what I'm doing, but it's useful discussion. So this application is structured very different. Amal, hello, how you doing? Good morning. But in general, the way it works is there is an API that sends a command. That command is processed in a handler, which again, you could argue is kind of like, well, that's kind of functional in its approach, that then interacts with other pieces, right? It's kind of coordinating. Yeah, good to hear it. Is it exactly what classes are for? No, it's very functional, right? So I have an endpoint that says register. In that register, I call execute on this particular thing. Again, very functional. This thing handles this message, right? So it's not really object orientation, right? I'm using it functionally, in my opinion. I'm using it to do a thing. I'm not using it to represent data. I'm not using it to represent values, etc. So it's very functional. And this is the way that C# has kind of gone these days. If you're using a class and putting a lot of these on, I know that you do, and I've seen some of your code. Obviously, you have that class that handles everything, but you could break that class up into this style in my opinion, in a very quick way. But it's not different than what you've got, right? It's different than what you have, but functionally, it's no different, right? You're still achieving the same thing. So I don't think we use classes the same way they were originally intended anyway, right? There are times when you do, but not necessarily. I think it's more functional. So this CQRS style, this command query response segregation style lends itself to this. Hey, I need a thing. So you're wrapping the data up in an object, right? This is a class. This is more a pure class. It's a representation of data. It's being passed through into an action, a handler, in this case execute. This is kind of my own code, but ultimately I'm following the same pattern in these things. This is kind of coordinating. This is more domain service if people are being picky over it. But yeah, it's doing those things. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. So in terms of coding style, coding practices, again, it's more important that you write code. So CQS, command query separation, was a principle introduced, I'm going to say Kent Beck, and I'm not certain, but it was introduced many years ago as a concept. The idea of command and queries being separate from each other, right? So doing a thing and asking for a thing should be different. And if you look at clean code style, a function should do a thing or return a thing. It should never do both, right? Not always easy to hold to. This does a thing and returns a thing, but I don't think that's too far out there. This is a result, right? So if you think about a get, an HTTP get is a request for data. It's a query, right? You're asking for something. If you post, you're telling it to do something. You're commanding it to do something. So it's kind of separating those concerns out. So writing different code. So in this instance, what I would do is, and I might have one in tenant management. Right? I don't anymore. I have commands, right? Associate a user with a tenant. That is a command. It's telling it to do something, right? It has a repository, so it can ask for data, but it's not its primary concern. Its concern is, hey, can I have some data now? Do this thing with this data, right? I'm telling it to do something. Tickets, definitely. Tickets has queries. We'll look over here in tickets. That should be big enough on stream. I don't think I can zoom in anymore right this second. But ticket has a query, right? If I want to get a ticket, then I want to say, hey, can I have this ticket, right? I don't want to kind of merge the concerns, right? So I have a ticket. So CQRS was an iteration on CQS by Greg Young, who's also responsible for something called Event Store DB, or event sourcing as a concept. That's a whole different pattern that one day I will go into. Afternoon, Mr. Jones. But he kind of evolved the CQS concern into command query response segregation. Let me make sure I'm 100%. I know it's Greg Young. Command query responsibility segregation. So actually the concept of your commands can be doing one thing. So if you think about data, if you've got a database context, a DB context in Entity Framework, by default, it attaches tracking to your objects, right? So if you change the object and then hit save changes, that object, those changes will be persisted. So if you actually are building this out in this design, you can say, okay, well, the command side of it definitely needs tracking, but the query side doesn't need tracking. When I'm getting the objects, I'm not changing them. I'm never changing them. So you can actually put a read-only user. You can actually create a different context if you want to, and treat that context for the query side very differently. Now, taken to an extreme, what you could have is the commands put data into the system, which then, through eventing, etc., produce data in a different format, and your queries talk to an entirely different database because they can be optimized for speed. They can be, they can be very different than the command objects that went in. But those command objects are storing the data in a logical thing for how you need to store the data relationally or however. But then you could normalize them or denormalize them in a query side just for querying, right? So it's kind of like if you've got a database that is built for CRUD, right? You're just adding data in, you're adding data in, you're adding data in, and then you say, oh, I need a report of how many things are wanted. Well, now that report is going against the same data that you're adding in, and now the database could be bogged down with indexes and stuff like that that get added to try and speed up reporting on the same data that you're adding to. So the churn there is bad. So then you start thinking, well, I can't delete data because if I delete data, I'm going to affect the indexes and stuff, and it's going to make a mess. So CQRS is very much built around that concept of breaking those two concepts apart so that you're able to build your system in an optimal way for both concerns. Right? So it's why microservices are useful, right? And you start getting into this whole architectural discussion of which part is coming and which part is helping, and like the CQRS from a microservices help from that perspective because then they're focused on a single thing and they're optimized. They have their own storage. They might publish events, and that event data is consumed into one big read system that you can then read from, right? So yeah, CQRS is command query responsibility segregation. But again, if anyone is interested in doing this stuff, if anyone interested in discussing these things, these opinions, these thoughts, feel free to jump in the Discord, and I'm always happy to talk about this stuff, right? It is something I love doing. The code is one thing, but I'm always happy to discuss opinions, thoughts, etc. on software development. All the videos get uploaded to YouTube because I'm streaming to YouTube and Twitch at the same time. So you're more than happy to go back and watch that to your heart's content. Is that polite enough? Okay, so I do have to finish up very shortly. Unfortunately, I'm not paid to do this. As much as I would love to do. Let me get this piece in there. Yeah. Mr. Jones is known for his trollisms. Okay, so let me put the points in here. This is kind of not really within the. I shouldn't be doing this because I'm writing tests, but this needs a preferences view model, right? Int user ID. Always. Right. So we've got that on the interface now, and now we're going to add that method in here as a dumb method right this second. So there's a lot of code in here that's deliberately made for conversation, right? This get preferences thing here, right? Repositories in general. If you talk to most people, did I just make that return in? No, I did. Adding repositories on top of Entity Framework is generally considered a bad thing because Entity Framework itself is kind of a repository pattern, or the DB sets are kind of repositories against the things they're talking to. But I don't feel that that's necessarily always useful because sometimes you need that abstraction because you don't want to bring. It's not about, hey, I might swap out my database for something. It's more about bringing in Entity Framework dependencies right throughout everything. Hey, C# Fritz, welcome. I completely disagree with the repository over EF is bad. Yeah. Again, I think it's like this particular repository. Like I've been using Ardalis's repositories recently, and I've really enjoyed using that with the Water Drink Water app. In here, I love using them. right? It's very quick and easy and smooth, and I love the idea of the specifications. Definitely better than anything else I've done. But in this app, I'm trying to, put those pieces in. It's not just you won't swap the database, but what if you want to move out something to a microservice? Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Again, being able to change your code, that's what matters most. If you're trying to plan for replacing your database, then okay, that's probably not going to happen for the most part. But if you're talking about, hey, I need to be able to change this code, and one of the things I'm always focused on is I don't want to be scared of my own code, and having those repositories helps me represent some things. It helps me unit test for clear, unit testing entity framework is horrible, right? Because you can only integration test entity framework because you're never going to get real queries. In memory is just underlying lists, so it doesn't really test anything in that respect. So I have no issue with repositories, layering that on top. Again, the style of this repository, maybe all we're doing is creating an application service, so it might not be easy to see. Maybe we can replace that later on. But the goal of this project, this drink water project, is not to be perfect architecture. It's more to be discussion based, so we can talk about what we can change, how we can change it, reflect back on PRs, look at these things and keep growing. I use this repository package from RDOS as well. Hi, Smirking. Hope you're well. I think software engineers get a bit too attached to their programming paradigms approaches. Everything is a tool and has at least some niche use somewhere. Absolutely. Pragmatism. Right? Be realistic about what you're writing. Again, make sure that what you're writing, if you're writing it with a group of people, don't be afraid to change things. Don't be afraid to write things in the style that you can agree upon as a team. Because again, what matters most is, can you move forward with the code? And if there's a problem with the code, how quickly can you fix it, right? Leaving technical debts out there, leaving maintenance nightmares in there because you're trying to get something done quickly is not good. If you can speed up working with the code because you've written cleaner code in general, not focused on someone else's expectations of what clean code is, but clean code in terms of readable, understandable, it does the job it needs to do and nothing more, then it's easy to maintain and kind of all feeds into itself. So writing code to someone else's expectations of what good code is never going to result in the best possible code, because you're never going to hit it. Someone's going to come in and say, you're doing that wrong. Okay, why am I doing it wrong? Right? Also prevents leaking link queries into the rest of your code. True. I do love the RDOS library. I've actually got RDOS result specifications, and I was using endpoints until I swapped out fast endpoints recently. But I think it just adds that layer on top that is nice. So, it's software development is fun. Software development should be fun. You should enjoy what you're doing and you should take pride in what you're doing. And that's kind of what I always want to do, right? I don't want to just churn out more code, right? I love doing this. I don't like this, but I'm going to come back and learn more about fast endpoints later. I think there's some things that I'm not doing right in there. So what I'm trying to do here right now is wire this up enough so that it's buildable. Then I can commit this. Consumption repository does not implement interface. Right, because I didn't put it on there. So let's do that. And again, I'm just going to go back to Junikus's original PR, and all that is this essentially. Yeah, it's and reusable, clearly reusable things. I've done a lot in the main project of some of the base classes that all have an identifier, so I can always say, hey, query by identifier because I know that it's there. This gives me that repeatable, clearly understandable code without having another link query sat on top. So I've really enjoyed using the specification stuff. Okay, so here, right, again, I'm adapting my data model into my view model so that I'm not bleeding my data right up to the front end. That's never what I want to be doing here. I want that nullable. Actually, it doesn't matter if that's nullable. That can be defaulted. And we'll do it that way for right a second. That's what it recommends. View changes. Oh, because it's a default. No, it doesn't. What am I doing? That one. We don't want to return null. There's no benefit in a null there. Shai, thank you very much for hanging out. I actually do have to finish up because fortunately they want me to do work. They expect me to earn some money. You're welcome. Thank you very much. And again, if anyone has any further points to discuss, things like this are things I want to stream about, right? They are not. It's not just about writing code, right? We all have a lot of opinions. We all have a lot of different ways of writing code, of how we develop code, how we design our systems, and those experiences all come together. Nothing's invalid, right? If you've been doing this 2 minutes, 2 months, 2 years, 2 decades, it doesn't matter as long as you are continuing to contribute to the conversation and you're trying to make sure that other people are growing at the same time. I hate the idea of saying that is the way to do it because I've done it a dozen times and it works well for me, right? If you come in and say, well, there's another way of doing it, and you can demonstrate that to me, or we can kind of talk about it, I might learn a lot along the way and have totally different ways of doing things, right? I watched a video over the weekend. I've been working with the Twitch APIs for a couple of years, right? Building the bots and stuff. And this person created a video, who I will actually shout out because he is he's a good game dev. He's again learning along the way. He's not perfect. He knows he's not perfect, but he's building his knowledge all the time, and he's a really smart guy that can do a lot. So Satolix is a really awesome game dev, trying to make his living developing games on Twitch. But he was able to put out a video, or will be putting out a video, and I was watching. I'm like, oh yeah, I can do that, right? I didn't close my mind, just like, well, it's a beginner video on how to write a Twitch bot. I've been doing this for years, right? That's the key, right? Don't just assume because you've done something once or 100 times that it's the only way to do it. Absolutely, Shy. You're more than welcome. The Discord is always there, and I'm always happy to talk about this stuff, right? I don't want to be that crusty developer that is unapproachable, right? That's kind of why I started streaming, right? I watch people like Fritz, and I watch all these amazing developers, and I'm like, I want to contribute what I do as well, right? So it's about sharing, and this community on Twitch is one of is fantastic for that, right? I don't think I need to introduce Fritz to anybody else in this stream. I think pretty much everyone should. If you've watched Twitch dev streams for more than 5 minutes, Fritz. So his streams are again focused on learning new things, doing cool things, and using technologies. I think that's the great thing about this platform we're all on. So yeah. So if you want to continue more conversation, the Discord is always there. You're more than welcome to join in. Again, we had a conversation over the weekend about story pointing. Do we think it's valuable? Is it useful? Right? Where is it breaking down? Those sorts of things. There's a few different points in there. Right? Welcome back, Junicus. I'm running very, very late. But yeah, so we're gonna raid out. Anybody has any suggestions of new people that I haven't been before? I'm more than happy to accept it. Yep. Absolutely, Shy. If you ever want to ping, just request. Just reach out. You can DM if you're more comfortable with that. I don't mind that either. Yeah. So, Delmamundo, thank you very much for the follow. Charlie, thank you very much for the follow. Thank you, Hardlight, for the raid today that got me off to a fantastic start. Again, I just want to do more of this stuff. So I'll be back tomorrow, same time, 7 a.m. Eastern. Unfortunately, these are the hours before I start work for the day. But I'll be back tomorrow. And I'll be doing more drink water. So again, the link's in the card below. So we're going to raid the Captain Coder, unless anyone has any suggestions, any community members they want to support. I'll raid the Captain Coder. So also a very fantastic learning stream. And yeah. Yes, I will push this very shortly. I'll build it and push this shortly on this branch. So thank you very much for the reminder. Take care all. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you again soon, I hope. Thank you.